You didn't just click this. Something in you slowed down for a fraction of a second before your mind had time to explain why. And that pause is more important than it looks. Most people scroll past moments like this without feeling anything, without noticing that subtle shift in attention. But something in you noticed. Something in you recognized this before you understood it. And if you're honest, this isn't the first time that's happened. There have been moments lately where things felt slightly off. Not in a negative way, but in a way that's hard to name. Like reality is still functioning, still moving, but there's an underlying sense that something about it isn't as fixed as it used to feel. You might have felt it in quiet moments, when everything around you is still, but your awareness feels unusually sharp, or in situations where you're making a decision and both options feel equally real, equally possible, like you're not choosing between paths but standing in the presence of both at the same time. Most people interpret those moments as confusion, as indecision, as something they need to resolve quickly so they can move forward. But what if that interpretation is incomplete? What if those moments aren't signs that something is wrong, but signals that something deeper is happening beneath the surface of your experience? Because here's what most people never stop to question. Why does reality feel so solid most of the time? And yet in certain moments it feels like it could shift in any direction? Why do there exist these rare points where everything seems suspended? Where the future isn't just unknown but almost visible in multiple directions at once? Those moments are usually dismissed, explained away, or ignored. But they are not random, they are not meaningless, and they are definitely not accidents. Something in you has already started to notice that the version of reality you've been living inside is not the only one available. Not in a dramatic science fiction sense, but in a subtle, almost quiet way. A way that doesn't announce itself loudly, but instead shows up as a feeling, a recognition, a sense that there is more happening here than what you've been taught to see. And the reason that feeling is getting stronger is not because something new is being added to your experience, but because something that was always there is becoming harder to ignore. Think about the last time you felt pulled towards something you couldn't fully explain. Not a simple desire, not something you could justify logically, but a kind of internal movement that didn't come from lack, didn't come from pressure, but felt more like recognition. Almost like you were remembering something instead of imagining it. That kind of pull doesn't fit into the usual way we think about decisions or goals. It doesn't feel like you're trying to create something. It feels like you're becoming aware of something that already exists at a level you don't fully see yet. And at the same time, you may have felt the opposite. Resistance to things that seem perfectly logical on the surface. Paths that make sense that other people would agree with, but something in you just doesn't align with them. Not out of fear, not out of doubt, but out of a deeper sense that this isn't it, even if you can't explain why. Those two experiences, the pull towards something unseen and the resistance to something that looks right, seem unrelated, but they're not. They are part of the same underlying pattern. What you are starting to feel is not randomness. It is not your mind overcomplicating things. It is the early awareness of something that your nervous system usually filters out. The sense that at certain moments reality is not a single fixed path, but something more fluid, something that hasn't fully settled into one outcome yet. And when that happens, when reality is still in that unresolved state, your awareness has access to more than one possibility at the same time. Most of your life, you've been trained to move quickly through those moments, to pick a direction, make a decision, and collapse everything into one clear path as fast as possible. That's how you stay functional. That's how you stay stable. But occasionally, something interrupts that pattern. Occasionally, you don't move immediately. You stay in that space just a little longer. And when you do, something unusual happens. You begin to feel both possibilities at once. Not as thoughts, not as imagination, but as something real. That's the part most people never talk about, because it doesn't fit into the normal way we describe reality. We like things to be clear, defined, singular, one path, one outcome, one version of events. But your experience doesn't always match that. There are moments where it feels like reality hasn't decided yet. Moments where your awareness is sitting in the middle of something that hasn't resolved. And instead of recognizing those moments for what they are, most people rush to escape them. But you didn't escape it this time. You paused, you felt it, and now you're here trying to understand what that feeling actually means. So let's slow this down for a second and look at it without immediately trying to fix it or define it too quickly. What if those moments of suspension, those points where everything feels open and undefined, are not gaps in your understanding but glimpses into how reality actually operates before it settles into the version you experience? What if what you're feeling in those moments is not confusion, but access? Access to a layer of reality that is usually filtered out so you can function normally. Because if that's true, then everything changes. It means that those subtle feelings you've been having are not random signals. They are not noise. They are information. Information about something that is happening beneath the surface of your everyday experience. And the more you pay attention to it, the more it starts to form a pattern that points to something most people never fully see. But before we go further, there's one question that needs to be asked. If reality can feel this open, this undefined, this full of possibility in certain moments, then why does it feel so stable and singular the rest of the time? Why does everything seem to collapse into one clear path, one continuous experience, instead of remaining in that open state? Because the answer to that question is where this stops being just an interesting idea and starts becoming something you can actually recognize in your own life. What if the reason reality sometimes feels unstable is not because something is breaking, but because something is revealing itself that is usually hidden beneath the surface? Because the moment you stop assuming that reality must be singular, you begin to notice patterns that were always there but never fully acknowledged. The feeling that multiple outcomes are present at once is not something your mind is inventing. It is something your awareness is detecting before your usual way of interpreting the world has time to simplify it. At the most fundamental level, reality does not begin as one fixed outcome. It begins as a range of possibilities. Not abstract ideas, but actual states that exist simultaneously before anything selects between them. In physics, this is described as a system holding multiple potential states at once, and only resolving into a specific outcome when an interaction occurs. But what matters here is not the technical language. What matters is the implication. The implication is that what you experience as a single continuous reality is not the only thing present in that moment. It is the version that has become visible to you. And the part that changes everything is this: the other possibilities do not simply disappear. There is no clear mechanism that shows them being erased or destroyed. Instead, what the deeper interpretation suggests is that they continue. They evolve along their own paths, becoming experiences that are no longer directly accessible in the same way, but not gone, not erased, just separated enough that your normal perception treats them as non-existent. Now bring that out of theory and into your life. Every time you reach a genuine decision point, not a trivial one, but a moment where two or more paths feel equally real, equally possible, you are standing at the edge of that same structure. It doesn't feel like physics. It feels like uncertainty. It feels like pressure to choose. But underneath that feeling, something more precise is happening. Multiple versions of your experience are present at once, and the moment has not yet resolved into the one you will live through. This is why certain decisions feel heavier than others. It is not just about consequences. It is about the density of possibility in that moment. When two paths carry equal weight in your awareness, it means both are fully formed enough to be felt. And the longer you stay in that space without rushing to collapse it, the more you begin to sense that it is not empty. It is full of direction, full of subtle signals, full of information that does not come through logic, but through something quieter. Most people have been trained to interpret that state as something to escape. Uncertainty is uncomfortable, so it must be reduced as quickly as possible. But what if that discomfort is not a flaw in the system? What if it is the edge of perception stretching beyond its usual limits? Because when you stay with it, even for a moment longer than usual, something starts to shift. The uncertainty becomes textured. It stops being a blank space and starts becoming something you can read. You begin to notice that one path carries a certain kind of energy. Not louder, not more dramatic, but more aligned in a way that is difficult to explain. Another path might look correct on the surface, might satisfy expectations, might make sense in every practical way, but something about it feels slightly off, slightly misaligned, like it belongs to a version of you that is no longer fully present. These differences are subtle, and they don't show up in the way you've been taught to make decisions. But they are consistent, and this is where the idea of influence enters. Not control, not forcing outcomes into existence, but participation. The quality of your awareness in those moments matters. Whether you are distracted, reactive, overwhelmed, or present, steady and attentive changes how clearly you can perceive what is already there. It doesn't create the possibilities, but it determines how you meet them. Think about the times when you were completely absorbed in something. Deep focus, deep stillness, or even moments just before sleep when your usual mental filters soften. In those states, your perception changes. You notice connections you would normally miss. You feel things more directly without immediately translating them into language. Those are small glimpses of what happens when the system that filters reality into a single stable stream relaxes its grip. Because the stability of your everyday experience is not an accident, it is maintained. Your nervous system constantly simplifies what is available so that you can function without being overwhelmed. It selects one version of events and treats it as the whole picture. Everything else is pushed into the background, not eliminated but deprioritized, to the point that it feels like it isn't there. That filtering is what allows you to move through the world without being paralyzed by too many possibilities. But occasionally that filter loosens, not completely, just enough. And when it does, the background becomes slightly more visible. Not as clear alternate worlds, not as something you can point to directly, but as influence. As a pull, as resistance, as a sense that something is already unfolding beyond what you can currently see. Most people don't have a framework for that, so they dismiss it. They call it overthinking, anxiety, imagination. But what if it is none of those? What if it is the overlap of possibilities making itself known in the only way it can, through subtle changes in how things feel before they become concrete? That would explain why certain futures feel familiar before they happen. Why certain directions feel wrong even when they make sense. Why there are moments where you feel like you already know something you have not yet experienced. This is also why the question you ask yourself in those moments matters more than you realize. If your only question is, "What should I do?" you reduce everything to action. You rush toward resolution. But if the question becomes, "What is actually present here that I'm not fully seeing?" your attention shifts. You stop trying to force an answer and start trying to perceive more clearly. And that shift alone changes what becomes visible to you. Because the moment of uncertainty is not empty. It is the point where the overlap is most active, the point where multiple directions are still influencing the present. And instead of treating that as a problem, you can begin to treat it as information. Information about which version of your life is already forming, already carrying momentum, already aligning with something deeper than surface-level reasoning. So when you feel that pull towards something you cannot explain, or that resistance to something that seems perfectly logical, instead of dismissing it, you can pause. Not to analyze it immediately, but to notice it. To recognize that something is being communicated in a language that is not purely verbal or logical. And the more you allow yourself to stay present with that, the more consistent it becomes. Now here's something I want you to actually do, not later, but as you're hearing this. Think about the version of your life that feels most alive to you right now. Not the one you are currently living, but the one that keeps showing up in the background of your awareness. The one that feels like it is already there in some way, even if it hasn't fully taken shape yet. Don't overthink it. Just notice what comes up first. And if you can put it into words, even loosely, write it in the comments. One sentence. Not a polished version, not something edited to sound right, but the first clear expression of that feeling. Because that response, the unfiltered one, often carries more truth than the version you would construct if you gave yourself more time. But this brings us to something deeper. If multiple possibilities are present, if they continue to exist and influence your experience in subtle ways, then why does your life feel like one continuous, stable reality most of the time? Why does everything seem to move forward in a single line instead of branching visibly in every direction? Because understanding that is the point where this stops feeling abstract and starts becoming something you can recognize everywhere once you see it clearly. The reason your life feels like one continuous, stable reality is not because only one version exists, but because your system is designed to experience it that way. Your nervous system is not built to show you everything. It is built to filter, to reduce, to organize an overwhelming field of information into something you can move through without losing coherence. And that filtering process is so effective, so consistent, that it creates the illusion that what you are experiencing is all that is there. But it isn't. It never was. What you call reality is a selected stream, a foreground, a version of events that your system has stabilized enough to treat as predictable and continuous. Everything else, every other possibility that existed at the moment before things resolved into what you now experience, is not destroyed. It is simply not being prioritized in your perception. It is moved into the background, into the layer of experience your system labels as noise, so you can function without distraction. And yet, even as it is filtered, it does not become irrelevant. It continues to exist as part of the same field your awareness is embedded in, which means it can still influence what you feel, even if you cannot point to it directly. This is why there are moments when something in you knows before you understand. Moments where you feel a direction without being able to justify it, or resist something without being able to explain why. That is not randomness, that is not confusion. That is sensitivity to information that is usually outside the range of what you consciously process. Think about the times when your usual sense of control softens. Deep stillness, creative absorption, the space just before sleep or just after waking, when your mind is not fully anchored in its normal patterns. In those moments, the boundary between what is foreground and what is background becomes less rigid, not completely open but more permeable. And when that happens, you begin to feel more than one layer of reality at the same time, not as separate worlds but as influence, as pressure, as a subtle shaping of what feels right and what doesn't. Most people experience this and immediately dismiss it. They return to the familiar structure as quickly as possible because that is what feels safe. But if you stay with it, if you allow yourself to notice without rushing to categorize or explain, a pattern begins to emerge. You start to recognize that the pull toward certain directions is not based on lack or desire alone. It is based on alignment. It feels like something that already exists at a level you are beginning to sense, even if you cannot fully see it yet. At the same time, the resistance you feel toward other paths starts to make more sense. It is not always fear. It is not always avoidance. Sometimes it is the quiet recognition that the version of reality those paths lead toward has already resolved in ways that are not aligned with what you are becoming. And that recognition does not come through logic, it comes through feeling, through subtle signals that your system picks up before your mind has language for them. This is where the shift begins, when you stop treating uncertainty as something to eliminate and start seeing it as something to read. Because uncertainty is not an empty space between what is and what will be. It is the moment where multiple possibilities are still present. The moment where the overlap is most active. And in that moment, your awareness is not just observing, it is participating. Not by forcing outcomes into existence, but by aligning with what is already present. The version of your life that feels most alive to you is not something you are inventing from nothing. It is a real possibility that exists within the same field you are part of. It has its own structure, its own continuity, its own direction. And the reason it feels familiar, the reason it feels like recognition instead of imagination, is because at some level you are already connected to it. What changes everything is how you relate to that connection. If you treat it as fantasy, as something distant that depends entirely on external circumstances, it remains abstract. It stays in the background, influencing you subtly but never fully coming into focus. But if you begin to treat it as something real and potential, something that is already forming and simply not yet visible in your current experience, your relationship to it shifts. You stop asking, "How do I make this happen?" and start asking, "What is already here that I am not fully seeing?" That question changes your attention. It moves you from forcing to noticing, from trying to control the outcome to becoming sensitive to the signals that are already present. And as that sensitivity increases, the boundary between what is and what is becoming starts to feel less rigid. This is not about abandoning action. It is about changing the source of it. Instead of acting from pressure, from expectation, from the need to resolve uncertainty as quickly as possible, you begin to act from clarity. Not perfect clarity, not complete certainty, but a deeper sense of alignment with what feels real beneath the surface. And that kind of action has a different quality. It carries less resistance. It unfolds more naturally. It feels less like pushing against reality and more like moving with it. Over time, this changes how you experience yourself. You stop seeing yourself as a single fixed identity moving through a predetermined path. You start to recognize that you are something more dynamic, a pattern of awareness that exists within a field of possibilities, constantly interacting with multiple directions at once, even if you only consciously experience one at a time. That doesn't make you fragmented. It makes you expansive. And the moments where you feel that expansion, where you sense that there is more than one version of your life present, are no longer confusing. They become meaningful. They become moments where you can pause, not to escape, but to listen, to notice what is actually there before it resolves into the next step of your experience. So when you feel that familiar pull, that sense that something more is possible instead of dismissing it, you can recognize it for what it is. Not wishful thinking, not imagination, but contact with a possibility that is already part of the same field you exist in. And when you feel resistance to something that seems correct on the surface, you can take that seriously as well, not as an obstacle but as information. Because you are not just moving through reality, you are part of how it unfolds. Not in a way that gives you absolute control, but in a way that makes your awareness matter. The quality of your attention, the depth of your presence, the way you meet the moments where things are still unresolved, all of that participates in what becomes real for you. And when you begin to see it that way, something shifts. The pressure to have everything figured out starts to loosen. The need to eliminate uncertainty fades. In its place, there is a different kind of focus, a willingness to stay present with what is emerging, to trust the signals that are already there, even if they don't fully make sense yet. Because the truth is, the version of your life that feels most alive to you is not waiting somewhere in the future. It exists as a real possibility right now. It is part of the same field you are already in. It is already influencing you, already shaping what you notice, what you feel drawn toward, what you resist, and the more you recognize that, the more you can meet it consciously. You are not a single point moving through a single line. You are the place where multiple directions meet, the place where different possibilities are continuously present, even if only one becomes fully visible at a time. And the moments where you feel that, where you sense the overlap directly, are not rare accidents. They are invitations. Invitations to become aware of something you have always been part of,